Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Bit of a different setup today. It's been a while since I've been in front of a computer for a video, but I wanted to revisit a video that I had a lot of fun doing several months ago. So this is where I take the covers of a load of upcoming fantasy releases and judge and rank them kind of like a tier listing to let you know which are my favourites and which ones I'm not a fan of. So I've picked out a load of covers. Some of these by the time you watch this video will now have been released because I'm going for anything that's got a release date in October 2022 or beyond. Let's go and take a closer look. So as you can see here, I've got 42 book covers all lined up ready to go, and I've set myself 5 different categories to put these in. So from bottom to top, I've got not a fan. These are the covers that I just don't like. They don't do anything for me, and overall they're not ones that would make me really look twice. Next up, it's okay, but not for me. These are the ones where the type of book it is, I know is not going to be for me. It might be urban fantasy or romance fantasy or something that I'm not generally going to read myself, but I think for the genre it's in, the cover does a good job. It's okay, but it doesn't appeal to me because of the type of book it is, rather than because of the cover itself. A solid cover next. These are going to be the books that generally are for me. They're probably epic fantasies or something along those lines, and the covers, I quite like them. They do a good job, but they're not quite the ones that I really like. That comes in the next category, or the next two. I like it a lot, kind of speaks for itself. I really like these ones. They're not quite perfect, but they're really good. And then Chef's Kiss at the top. They're the ones that are close to perfect for me, the ones that are my favourites from this selection. So as I say, there's 42 titles, so I'm not going to spend too much time on each of these because I don't want the video to be too long. So let's go and dive straight in and see what we've got. So we're going to start off with The Alchemy of Sorrow, which is a fantasy and sci-fi anthology. So plenty of authors on here, I'm not going to go through all of them. And I quite like this cover. It's got some good artwork, some good colours. I like the imagery with the birds there. I think the text works well. The issue that I have with anthology covers is you list all of the author names because you want to give them their due respect, but it does make it take up a little bit more of the cover, and I think that's well dealt with here. So overall, it's a good job, and for me, I like this quite a lot. Next we have The Ashfire King Boy, Chelsea Abdullah, and this one, again, it's got some nice imagery with the birds and the kind of blue magic kind of wisps around it there. The rest of the cover I'm not a big fan of. I don't like the kind of background on there. It works overall, I think, but I would suggest this one it's okay, but it's not for me. The cover for the novella The Battle That Was Lost by Michael S. Jackson. This one's a cover with some good imagery on here. I like the artwork, although there's a lot of it that's just taken up by essentially the sky, but I think it works well, and I like the title in the middle of there. I think overall it works really quite nicely. It's a good solid cover. The Betrayed by Jeff Wheeler. This is a title that I've not really heard of. I've seen the cover a couple of times and I quite like it. It's a bit like the previous cover where there's some really good artwork that I appreciate. We've got characters looking away from us, so you don't get the faces in there, which I know some people don't like. For me, it depends on the cover. But with this one, I think it works quite well. You've got a nice city in the background there. The text fits the cover quite well, I think. So this is another one that I'm going to say is a good, solid cover. Next up, we've got Blade of Dream by Daniel Abraham. And this one, I'm going to go straight ahead and say I don't really like it that much. The text on it, first of all, is just far too big. It basically covers the entire cover and you can't really see what's behind it. But also behind it, I'm not sure that would give me too much anyway. So I don't like this one that much. I don't like the title of this one as well, just as a side point. Blade of Dream, it sounds like it should be Blade of Dreams, but maybe they didn't want to get that mixed up with Knife of Dreams from The Wheel of Time. Overall, I think it's okay. It's not one for me, even though the type of the book, the genre of the book, I would say is for me. And I have read the first book in this series as well, so that kind of confirms that point. But I'm going to put this in the it's okay, but the cover itself isn't for me. Next up is Blood Reunion by JCM Byrne, and this one is more of a science fantasy. The cover itself doesn't do anything for me. I'm not really a fan of this type of cover. It doesn't tell me enough about the story, although I would guess that if I've read the first 2 books in this series, maybe I would be in a different position on that front. Overall, I'm going to put this one into the bottom category because I'm not really a fan of this one. Next up, we've got True Disguise, Book 2 of The Cruel Gods, which is The Children of Chaos. There's some nice colours in this one. I think I would say I prefer the cover of the first book, which is a bit more blue, but I like the purples here, and it's more the composition and the poses that the characters are in that I prefer in the first book. I like the text in here, even though the series title is bigger than the book title. I don't mind that now I know what the series is called and which is the title of the book. Overall, I think it's quite good. It sets the scene, I think, for the type of book I know this one to be, and I'm going to put it in a solid cover. Next up, I've got an Andrei Sapkowski cover, City of Last Chances. I know a lot of people really love this cover. I like the colours, I like the overall kind of composition. I don't really like the cover overall though. It's okay. It doesn't really do it for me. I can't really put my finger on it, whether it's the World War II type armed forces at the bottom, perhaps. Maybe that's the thing that's really putting me off this. That's not really for me. Overall, I'm going to put this in a solid cover because I think it is, but it's not good enough for me to like it a lot. Another second book in the series next from James Rollins this time. This is The Cradle of Ice, and I'm going to put this straight away into not a fan. The first book in the series here was kind of reds and blues, and it was a bit weird with the 2 rings on there, the 2 coloured rings, but I think it worked okay. The colours did okay for it. I don't like the colours on this one. I don't think they work quite as well together in this particular design, so it doesn't work for me overall. Next, we've got a book which I would say is definitely not for me. This is Cursed by Marissa Mayer, which looks like a fairy tale retelling. First of all, I am one of the many people who hate the fake stickers that you've got, like on this cover. I have seen a few variations of this cover, some with and some without sticker, some with different colours, and this one I picked because it's the cover out of the selection I saw that I liked the most. And I have to say, I really do like it. Although the book is definitely not going to be from me, I love the colours on there. I think it's a nice composition, a nice design, but I just really love those colours. And even though it's got a fake sticker on it, I'm going to put this in the top category, Chef's Kiss. Next up is a weird one, as far as I'm concerned at least. This is another book too. It's Daughter of Darkness by Terry Brooks. I spent a lot of time when I was collating the images trying to figure out what I was going to do with this one. I've ended up with, I like it a lot. I don't know what it is, but I do just, for some reason, quite like it. It seems to me a little bit too blue. There's not a vast amount of colour, but the more I look at it, the more I'm drawn into it, the more I see and the more I like it. So I think that definitely works in that respect. It's got a nice little flash of green with whatever it is here. Is it a tentacle or a tail at the bottom there? I'm not sure. But overall, I've ended up quite liking this one. Another one here that I spent a little bit of time and ahhing in which category to put it in. This is The Daughters of Izdihar by Hadir Elspy. And I've ended up with this one going into a good solid cover. I like the design overall. I like the magic or whatever it is coming from the character's hand there. I like the colours that you've got going into the sky above, but I don't like the design. I don't like the pattern that's in the sky as a whole, and I think that puts me off this one just a little bit. So I think it's a good solid cover. For me to go into, I like it a lot. Just a few little tweaks, but not too many, would be needed. Next up, we've got Dragonfall by Al Lam. And I'm not going to say too much about this one. I'm just going to put it straight into Chef's Kiss. This might be my favourite cover from this entire selection. I just really like this one. I think it works really well. The colours, the design, composition, everything I just really quite like about this one. So nicely done, Chef's Kiss. And then we come to Kian N. Ardalan's The 11th Cycle, which is kind of a strange looking cover here. And to this point, I've not asked the author, I'm tempted to, but I'm not sure yet how many arms this character has. My brain says 4 because you can clearly see 2 arms on his right side, but I can't quite see a second arm on his left side, so I don't know if there's 1 or 2 arms hiding underneath that cloak. That's weird, and it's just one of these covers that makes you really look at it and study it and think about it, and I quite like that about a cover. The composition and the actual quality of the artwork is really good. I like the colours on here. Overall, it's a bit of a weird one for me. It's maybe not my normal taste, but I really do quite like this one, so I'm going to put it in Chef's Kiss. Next up, we've got Emperor of Ruin by Django Wexler, and this is another one that's got the text taking up pretty much the entire cover. However, I think it does a much better job than Blade of Dream does. You can see what's behind the text here, and it does tell its own little story. There's a bit of a scene rather than just some architecture, and I like that. You can see various little things you can keep studying and see more and more the more you look at this one. The colours on it I quite like. I like the purples in there. You've got the little glow of flame down towards the bottom there in between the author's first and second name, and overall I think it's not a bad job. However, the text does still take up too much of the cover, and that kind of ruins it a little bit for me. So I'm going to put this down as being a good solid cover, but it's not a great one. Empire of Exiles next by Erin M. Evans. And we've seen this type of cover quite a lot. It's very much a First Law type cover, Joe Abercrombie, and it doesn't really do much for me. I've seen it a few too many times, and it kind of makes a book lose its identity as far as I'm concerned, because there are just so many that are so very similar to it. So this one is okay. It's kind of a good solid cover, but at the same time it just doesn't do it for me, so I'm going to put it in that second bottom category. Next up, we've got The Endless Song by Joshua Philip Johnson. This is another second book in the series. I think the first book was The Forever Sea, and it's got like a sea of grass and a ship on it, and loads of people really like it. Didn't really do it for me though, and that's what I'm going to say about this book as well. The artwork is okay. I quite like the text actually. It's nice where it looks like the text is designed for the book rather than just stock fonts. Overall, it doesn't really do much for me as a book cover, so I'm going to put it in. It's okay, but not for me. Then we have Fortress of the Lost Amulet by Michael Webb. And I quite like this cover. I like the artwork. I like that it's got a nice scene on here. You can see characters, you can see the city, you've got waterfalls on there. It's just a really interesting one that you can look quite deeply in and get lost in a little bit. The text I quite like. It doesn't stand out maybe too much, but it definitely stands out enough. So I appreciate that. I like as well the level of the detail here where you've got a nice little rainbow going above this bridge. It's just the little things on there and the sun rays coming in from the top left corner that really set this apart. I quite like it. It's not perfect for me, but it's not actually too far off, so I'm going to go with I like it a lot. And then we have The Foxglove King by Hannah Witten, and this one is definitely not the sort of cover for me in types of the type of book that it tells me to expect from this. But overall, I'm not actually much of a fan of the cover itself either. So there's some okay colours on this, but I'm not sure, for me at least, that they all go together, certainly in this design. Overall, it's quite an easy pick for me to put this into the bottom category. I'm not a fan. And then we've got Mithril Feywood with A Gamble of Gods. And this is one that will divide some people from what I've seen online so far. I really like the text on here. I think it works really well. It's got a nice dragon and some nice colours there as well. I really don't like these characters though. I don't like the artwork on there. It's kind of good artwork, but it just really doesn't work for me. And overall, I really think that spoils this cover for my mind. I'm going to put it in I'm not a fan, because I'm just really not. I think those characters just do not work for me. Despite the fact that I really like the text, overall, I'm not a fan. Next we have God Restrainer by Christopher Mitchell, and I've seen several of his covers and I've got one on my shelf, and they all follow a kind of certain design where you've got a character looking off the page at you, so you can see the features, you can see their face in full, and they take up the full part of the cover. You can't see too much else behind them. It's just a little bit plain behind them. So there's definitely a design there with the border as well. You can tell if you know them that it's from this author and from his series, but This one, it just doesn't quite do it for me. I'm not sure what it is. The artwork's okay, although I'm not quite sure on how she's holding that sword. It just doesn't look quite right with the upper hand there. Overall, I'll go with it's okay, but it's not for me. Next we have Heliotrope by Palmer Pickering, and this is one that's a bit different to kind of the way I go with a lot of covers. Often I'll look at a cover and I'll think it's okay, and the more I look at it and the more I examine it, the more I like it, the more I can pick out and appreciate. This one kind of goes the opposite way. I like it a bit less now that I've really kind of studied it and looked at it in a bit more detail. I don't mind the text, but it doesn't quite work for me with just the black stroke on it. But the main thing is the artwork itself. It's really nice art, I like it, but there's just a few little niggles that I've got on it. The way he's holding the swords, the position of the axe looks a bit wrong. The way that she's jumping through the air, but her hair seems to be flowing the wrong way. She's looking straight ahead, but shooting over in a different direction. Her foot is the wrong side of his cape, so she's going to land in his back. It just doesn't quite work, despite the fact that when I just glance at it, I really like it. I think it's pretty cool. So I'm going to put this one in a solid cover, because I think it is, even though I've got those few niggles about it. Next up we have A.K. Mulford, The High Mountain Court. I think it's one of these TikTok sensations, which for me is a bit of a red flag almost, because it seems that every time I hear TikTok sensation, there's always controversy and stuff like that around it, and it never seems to work out well. With this one, I'm not a fan of this cover at all. There are two books, I believe, released at the same date, and the second one has sort of nice blues on there, and it's nicer than this cover, but would still land in the not a fan category, because overall, it just does nothing for me. I don't like it at all. Next we have The Killing God by Stephen Donaldson, and although I quite like the colours on this one, it works quite well in that respect, I'm not really a fan of the cover. It doesn't do anything for me. And it's called The Killing God, and then you've got a book that's on fire or it's got magical flames. So it doesn't relate to the title, at least, for me as someone who knows nothing about this book and this series. Overall, this is the sort of book where I think this is a big name author. He deserves a better cover than this. I'm not a fan. This book has already been released, but it's being re-released now that it's been picked up by a trad publisher. This is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldry, and it's got a new cover for at least the UK market when it's re-released. I quite like this one. It's one that I think will divide people. Part of that is probably because of the bias, because people are used to seeing the original cover and they're connected to that one. So there's always a bit of reluctance to change a cover once you get to know it. So I completely understand that. This one I think is okay. I like the colours. I think it does a good job for what I understand the story to be. It isn't perfect, and although it's part of the image, the chalkboard, I actually really don't like the wooden border around it, so that one kind of spoils it a little bit for me. But overall, I do quite like it. It's not a usual type of cover for me to like, but I do quite like this one. I'll put it in the second category. Next we have a book from the author of The Witcher. This is Light Perpetual by Andrei Sapkowski, and straight away this one screams to me Joe Abercrombie. It looks like it is the fourth book in the, is it the Age of Madness series that he wrote, where they've all got the flags and the banners front and centre. That's the first thing I thought when I looked at this cover. Now, I did move it up and down a couple of categories here, and I've landed on a solid cover because I think it is a solid fantasy book cover. It doesn't work for me. I'm not really a fan of it, but at the same time, it's just personal bias on there, and I really do think actually that, yeah, it's a solid cover, even if I'm not a fan of it. So this one is one that I'm definitely a little bit divided on, even within myself, but I'm going to land in the middle and put it under a solid cover. Talking of being divisive, we've now got The Lost Metal by Brandon Sanderson, and this one, I'm not a fan of it. I have to say, I am not a fan of these covers. I like the colours. I like the blue and the white and the splashes of black in there as well. What I really don't like about these Mistborn covers is this blue border around them. It makes me really think that the white outside of the border shouldn't be there. The book needs to be cut out in that weird, almost egg timer type of shape. I don't know why I really dislike that border. It just doesn't work for me whatsoever. The cover itself isn't one I'm a fan of, the design of it. The artwork's fine and I love the blues wisping through around the characters there, but I know that it's not going to be for me because Mistborn Era 2 isn't for me at all, and I can tell that from the characters that are shown on the cover as well. So overall, I'm not a fan. I really would like it more though if it was even just the same cover but with a very different border. Next I've got a Lust for Blood, or I haven't got a Lust for Blood, but next up is a Lust for Blood by K.C. Smith, and this one is not a bad cover actually. It's got good colours on there. I like the kind of focal point of the red or the orange moon in the background there. I think it works quite well. The type of book it is, I'm guessing is not going to be for me, but I think it works well for the type of book I believe it to be portraying. So it's definitely got that going for it. It's just not for me. So that's the category I'll put it in. It's okay, but it's not for me. Next up we have the omnibus cover for the Obsidian Path by Michael R. Fletcher. This cover is just bonkers and it's unapologetically so, and I love it for that. It's absolutely crazy. It's really nice artwork and I think the composition and the text is all absolutely fine as well. It's one of those ones that's just a bit of a weird cover, but I like it. It just really works for what I know of the book or the series and what it's trying to show there. So I'm going to put this under Chef's Kiss. I think it does a really good job. Next up we've got the Outlaw Mage by K.S. Veloso, and I like this cover. I like the artwork, I like the kind of the imagery, what it's put in across here without really showing too much. And I like the colours on there as well of the staff, and the way that she looks like she's bleeding as she's holding the staff. Is that through something that's happened or is that because of the staff? I don't know, but it interests me. I'm going to put this in. I like it a lot because I do. Then we have Path of a Warrior by Melissa Stone, and I love the blues on here and I like the little magic kind of swirl of this portal or whatever it is behind this character, but I really don't like the character and the stance that the character has here. I saw it straight away and I now cannot get past seeing it, that it just looks like she's playing golf. She's on a green and she's ready to putt at the 18th hole, and that kind of spoils it for me, so I'm not a fan overall. Next up we've got a book by Allegra Pescator and E. Sands, and this is a Peddler of Chains, and it's a bit of a weird cover. There's quite a lot going on here. I don't mind it. It's definitely not one that's for me. I think it does kind of work. What I really do like about this though is the wings on there. It looks like kind of a butterfly girl. It puts me in mind of Shadows of the Apt by Adrian Tchaikovsky for that, and I really appreciate it. There's loads of little swirls of magic on that bow and the arrow and at the guy's hand, although I don't like the design of the kind of the magic that's on his hand there. That doesn't work for me. I've seen it on a few book covers and it's not for me. It's a bit too cartoony, I think. Overall, I don't like the fact that the characters very much look like they are computer generated, especially in the female where she's just got completely dead looking eyes. He's not too bad, but I think that does spoil the cover overall. I'm going to go with this one being okay, but it's not for me. Now this one, The Red Scholar's Wake by Aliette de Bodard, kind of slipped in here when I was putting this together. I saw the cover and I quite liked it, so I included it. It is actually a sci-fi though, rather than a fantasy, but by the time I realised that I've actually included it, I'd already put my list together, so it's staying. I like the colours on here. I think it's not necessarily my normal type, but it just works really well. I'm really drawn to this. I think it looks like a very, very pretty cover. So I'm going to put this in. I like it a lot. Next up, we've got a very Norse looking cover, The Ringbreaker 1139 Orkney Jar by Jean Gill. And I can tell straight away that this isn't probably the type of book that I would read. It looks a bit too historical fantasy just because of the Celtic swirls, and 1139 sounds to me like a date, so it's very much real world historical as far as I'm guessing. I think it kind of works okay for what it's portraying though, so although it's not for me, I'm going to put it in that second bottom category. Next we've got Shadow of a Winter Moon by Cam Sinclair, and I'm a bit divided on this cover. It could have gone higher than I ended up putting it, which is a good solid cover. I do quite like it, but it's just a little bit too dark. It's almost like you've got a nice piece of artwork and then it's had a bit of a wash of kind of a purple grey, and it's just really toned down and kind of bleached out all of the colour in there. So it's quite good. I like the artwork, but it just doesn't work brilliantly because of that. Although I do like how you've got that nice flash of red of the guy's cloak on there as a result. This one I'll go with, as I say, a solid cover because I think it is, but it could be better for me. This one is The Spice Road by Maya Ibrahim, and straight away I can tell that it may or may not work for me as a book. I'm not quite sure, but I'm going to put it in. It's okay, but not for me. It looks a little bit too kind of Arabian Nights, and that's not really the type of story I read. I don't mind the setting if it's a fantasy world, but Spice Road could be real world, could be fantasy, I don't know. Overall though, I'm looking at the cover though, that's what I'm here for. It's okay, but it doesn't quite work for me, so that's the category I'm going with. Next up, we've got a novella by Jim Wilborn. This is Strangers in the Promised Land, and this is the book that I'm reading at the time of filming, as it happens. I really like the colours on here, the blues and the purples. It's very vibrant, very bold, but overall I'm not a fan of the design of the cover. The text itself is okay. I think the font works quite well. I like that it's designed together. I'm not quite so sure on the Continua Chronicles novella being kind of squashed into the middle of the title there. That one doesn't necessarily work for me so much. Overall, because I'm not a fan of the general design of it, even though I like the colours and I like the book itself, this one I'm going to put into my bottom category. Next I've got Joan He with Strike the Ziva, and this one is not one that's really for me. I'm not a fan of this artwork style. I think the cover itself looks okay though, so I'm going to put it in that second bottom category. It's not for me, but for what it is, I think it does a pretty good job. Then we have Tower of Silence by Larry Correa, and this is another one where you've got a big name author in fantasy and a cover that doesn't do him justice, in my opinion. This is quite possibly for me the worst cover that I've got in my collection today. I really, really do not like it. First of all, it's too black, and then you've got this kind of orb in the middle with your image in it, and it doesn't work for me. It doesn't look right, but I also don't like how you've got little snippets of text all over the cover here. It looks like a Scandinavian football team where you've got sponsors all over the shirt. It's just every little section available is taken up by text. It doesn't work for me whatsoever. I do not like it. I'm definitely not a fan. Next up, we've got Untethered Sky by Fonderly, and I quite like this one. I like the artwork here. I like the imagery, what it's depicting. I'd be interested to read this book. I don't really like the text. I don't think the font really suits the picture. And I think as well, while the author name is fine, the title is just too small for me. I think that we can have a bigger font, maybe a little bit less spacing between the letters, just tying it all together and making it fit in if you increase the font size. But I think it just needs to be a bit bigger, because although it doesn't cause an issue, you've got a lot of unused space where you've got the underside of that prow of a ship, is it? Maybe, I'm not quite sure. So you've got a lot of kind of shadow and a lot of black there. And I think that the text, the title of the book, should take up a bit more of that space. This one I quite like overall though. In fact, I'm going to go with I like it a lot, because I really am quite interested in the book based on the cover. Almost there now, and the penultimate title I've got is by Catherine Buell. This is White as Witching, and this is definitely not going to be one for me. It's fairy tales, you've got fairies on the cover as well. But I really like the cover. I think it works really, really well. I love the colours on it. They're well proportioned. The imagery itself is very simple, but just works really well. I'm going to put this in my chef's kiss category because I think it just works really, really well. Although I'm never going to read this book, it's just not for me at all. It's not what I'm interested in. I really, really appreciate that cover. And then finally we have Witch King by Martha Wells, and this is another one of those that I could change my mind a few times each time I look at the image itself, but I'm going to go with I'm not a fan, because although the artwork is okay, the composition of it just seems a little bit odd, where you got the character's head going off the top of the page basically. But the main issue I've got with this one is you've got this piece of artwork. It almost then looks like there's an extra dark layer that's been put over the top of the artwork just to dull it down, take away any vibrancy, make it all a bit shadowed. And then you've got 2/3 of the cover there is taken up by the author and the title, and it just doesn't work for me. It doesn't look like a good book cover for me. It needs to be a bit better proportioned, maybe zoom out a little bit on the image, tone down the text on there a little bit. You could probably fit Witch King on one line instead of two, and that gives you a lot more space. Make the author name a little bit smaller as well, and that would vastly improve this image for me. Overall, I'm not a fan. So there we go, there's my thoughts on the covers of 42 up-and-coming fantasy books. The dates on these vary from right at the start of October up to, I think, July 2023 is the furthest out of these. I didn't go through the dates as I was going through them for various reasons, but these are all books to look out for. Let me know in the comments down below which of these were your favourites, which do you agree or disagree with my reasoning and the categories I put them in. If you've appreciated this video, give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe if you haven't already and you want to see more content from me in the future. Below this video you'll find all the links if you want to connect with me elsewhere on my social media, my book club Discord or my Patreon. I'll hopefully see you in the next video sometime soon, but until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.